Hello and welcome to part 4 of Comprehensive Chess School, Soviet School of Chess. And in this video we will continue discussing various aspects of tactics and strategy, and especially relative strength of the pieces. This will be the topic of today's video. Just a small introduction. I think we all have heard one way or another this strength, this table, how the pieces relate in strength to each other. And usually it looks something like this. So pawn worth 1, knight and bishop are of equal worth, so they worth 3 or 3.5 points, depending on which author do you reference. Rook worth 5 and queen worth 10. So this is just some rough table. If you want to make some exchange, how do you know if it's worthwhile? These numbers can differ in the various books. You can find that knight worth like 3 and bishop is 3 and 1/4, or sometimes queen is 9 and so on. But I mean, just as a general rule, this table is fine to understand. For example, if you want to exchange your rook and knight, for example, for a queen, is it worthwhile or not? So this is just something every chess beginner knows, and these rules usually apply. But the more interesting situations are in which these rules doesn't apply in this literal manner. In fact, the strength of every piece depends on its position on the board, its relative position with regards to pawn structure, to other pieces, its activity, and so on. So, for example, it often says that knight, which has a good outpost on the 6th rank, is worth a rook, for example. And so in this video we'll go through several positions which have material imbalances. So that means that one side, if you just apply this table, one side will be worse than the other, but still you will see how the position changes the relative strength of the pieces. So this is the aim of today's lesson. So let's go to the first position and let's try to discuss this. So in this position it's white's turn to move, and you can see obvious material imbalance. Black is materially disadvantaged, so he has only one pawn, and white has a queen. So queen worth 10 and pawn worth 1, so white should be much better. And in fact, in this position, white can win the game. And if you know the technique, it's easy. So this is also very common endgame, because it comes about when you have a pawn race and then one side manages to promote the pawn before the other side does, and then you end up in a similar position. So how to win this position is starting with a check, queen g2 check, and now king has to go to here to e1, because if king goes, for example, on e3, then queen f1 will be played, and the next move will be that queen will be in front of the pawn. When the queen is in front of the pawn, then he can no longer promote, and all white needs to do is to bring his king and just capture the pawn. So let's say that black plays this a little bit smarter, so he goes to e1 here, but now you can again check. King has to move somewhere. Let's say he goes to f2, and now queen d3, stopping the promotion. So any move is either stopping the promotion or a check. So he cannot now promote because he'll just capture the pawn, so king has to come back to protect the pawn, but now queen e3, very thematic move. And now what is black king to do? If he moves away, he'll just lose the pawn, so he has to come in front of the pawn. And now the pawn cannot promote, and now in this position, white sees the opportunity to bring his king in the game. So king f4. And this goes if king is, it can be in the corner of the board, the procedure is the same. And now again, okay, king c2, queen e2, now pinning the pawn and thus stopping the pawn from the promoting. So king c1 now, and queen c4 check. Queen b2 doesn't want to get in front of the pawn, but now just queen d3. You see the similar pattern, just from the other side. So king has to protect the pawn, and now queen c3 check, king comes in front of the pawn, and white now brings his king closer. And now whatever black plays, it will be check, and very soon checkmate. Okay, so this is the first position in which the material imbalance is something which allows white to win the game. But let's see a very similar position. So for example, this one. So in this position, although white has a queen and black has a pawn, so there is a huge material advantage according to our table here for white, but still white cannot win the game. And this is because black queen can always hide behind the pawn, and there is no other side, there is no other side of the board in which you can do this maneuver. So let's just play a few moves. So queen to g4 check, and king just goes in the corner. And now you can see that queen, now usually in the normal, if this was some other pawn, you will bring up the king. But you cannot bring up the king because then it will be a stalemate, because queen controls this file. So this is why you cannot do the same technique, because the king cannot come. So you can try some other stuff, you can try some checks, but the king will still, he'll just be near the pawn, and you cannot chase him away. So if you try this check, he can just go to the corner. If you try this check, he can just go up, and if you check him again, of course now he will not go to h1, because then this would be a checkmate, but he will go to g1, and then you can just repeat the position, and there is no way white can win. So this is the first example in which huge material advantage doesn't guarantee the victory. And by the way, if a king is a little bit closer, this can still be a won game. So let me just show you this position. So this is the same position like before, only before we had the king far away. So we have now king here, okay, and now thanks to the fact that king is nearer, we can win this. But we need to be very careful and to know the technique. So queen g4 check, king h1, queen d1 check, king g2, queen e2 check, king g1, and now king can come closer to the game, allowing the promotion of the pawn. So the pawn promotes, but now the king goes to g3. And this checkmate cannot be stopped. And this position, Magnus Carlsen once said that this is the most beautiful position in whole chess, because you can see how interesting the position is. So black has a queen, but and the white king is completely in the open, but still black cannot stop the checkmate. So whatever black does, he'll just either get checkmated or lose the queen if he plays something like this. So this is the way how white can win if the king is more closer. Okay, let's go to the next similar position. So in this kind of position, you can see it's very similar. So first time we had a pawn on the e file, second time we had on h file. So it was a central pawn, this was a rook pawn, and now this is called the bishop pawn, because this is the square for the bishop. So the bishop pawn also white cannot win. So although he has a huge material advantage, he cannot win here. Let's see why. So queen to g4 check, and now let's say king to h2. We do the same procedure like in the first example. So queen to f3, king to g1, queen to g3 check, and now we expect that king can just come behind the pawn, and we can bring our king nearer. But the particularity of this position is the king doesn't have to go to f1, he can go just to h1. And now if queen takes the pawn, the king is stalemated. It's a stalemate. So king cannot come further, because then the pawn will just promote, and there is nothing white can do. White cannot achieve the position in which he can safely bring his king up, and this is why this is draw, although white has a huge material advantage. Okay, let's go to the next example. So this is very interesting example. So white obviously has a huge material advantage. He has two rooks, and black only has the bishop. But here you can see no matter whose move it is, whose turn it is, black cannot win. Because first of all, this rook is pinned, this rook cannot move, and this rook is also attacked twice. So all white has to do is to just play waiting move with his bishop. So either on a1 or on b2, and black cannot do anything. So for example, if black ever moves this rook, bishop will just take the rook with a check, and it's a draw, because rook alone cannot checkmate the king and the bishop. So this rook cannot be moved because it's pinned. If he moves the king somewhere, then white will just take the rook. So black cannot move anything, and as long as white plays this waiting moves along this diagonal, it will be a draw. So huge material advantage doesn't help black in this particular position. Okay, let's go to the next example. This one is a little bit more complicated. So this is the position. and it's white to move here. But in order to understand what how can white proceed, what can white do, we first have to imagine that what would happen that it was a black's turn to move. So we always have to ask ourselves what is the best move our opponent has. So imagine here that it is black's turn to move. So what can black do? For example, if he plays king to h3, well, white can just play queen to f1, pinning the rook, and the next move he will win the rook and the game. So it doesn't work. Okay, what else? Let's say that he plays rook to g1. This doesn't work because this is just checkmate. Okay, what else can he play? Let's say he goes rook to g7, trying to, to give some checks here. But then queen to e5 is check and also winning the rook. So this also doesn't work. What else can black do? Let's say the black goes to g8, so not to get into this double attack. But here again, it only needs several checks for white to win the rook. So, for example, bishop e5 check, king to h1, queen to a1 check, king to h2, and now just queen to a2 check and attacking the rook. So this doesn't work. Okay, let's see what else can black do here. Black could try to play rook to a2, for example, just to keep, the rook in the game. But here again, white can win a rook. So queen to e5 check, king to g1, queen to d4 check, king to h1, queen to h8 check, king to g1, and now queen to g8 check and winning the rook. So basically, in this position, whatever black does, he will lose the game. But it's white's turn to move. So white calculates all these variations which I have just shown you, and white realizes, okay, if only I can have the same position, but with his turn to move, it will be great, I will win the game. And this is what is called, losing the tempo or giving a tempo, or sometimes it's called triangulation, because usually this maneuver includes triangle, as you will see. So what can white do here? Well, he can do some checks and try to get in the same position, but with black's turn to move. So white can begin with queen to e5 check, king to h1. This is forced because if king would go to h3, then this would just be checkmate. So king to h1, and now queen to a1 check. And again, if he plays here, this will be just checkmate. So king has to come to h2, and now queen to e1. So you can see the same, if you can just see the maneuver. So in this position it was white's turn to move, and then after this triangle, now it's the same position, but it's black's turn to move, and we already see how this is won. So this is called triangulation because it usually includes some kind of triangle, to just come to the same place using 3 moves. Okay, let's go to the next example. So here again we have material imbalance, and now white has a queen against black's rook. And usually this kind of imbalance guarantees the victory for white. But in this particular position, due to this strange position of the queen, this is the draw. So all black has to do is to give perpetual check, with the rook, and you can notice that white's king cannot come to the e file, because then this check will just win the queen. So the game could go like this. So he can do check, king goes here, check, and now it doesn't make any sense for king to go here because, like I said, the queen will be just 1. So let's say that he goes, he wants to come closer, maybe to threaten some kind of checkmate. So let's just imagine this kind of scenario. So he goes to h6. This is as far as the king can go. But now, well, due to this position of the queen, black can just play rook to h7, check, and when king takes the rook, it's a stalemate, because this queen is here. Or white could try something else. So, for example, here, instead of going to h6, white can try to go to f6, but now again, rook to g6 check, and well, if he takes the rook, now it's again stalemate. So this is how black can always draw in this position. Let's go back. Okay. And but for example, if the same position occurs but it's white turn to move, then it's white can easily win. Not easily, but he can win. So the same position, white to move. all he needs to do is to get this queen out of this weird position. So just queen to d6 check, king moves somewhere, and then he can just go on and bring his king closer and continue the game. And in principle, if white knows the technique, this is one endgame for him. Okay, let's go to the next example. So here again, material imbalance. So black has rook and white has only the pawn, but in this position it doesn't matter whose move it is, white is winning, because he has only one move to promote. So if it's white's turn, he'll just promote and go to the end game with the queen against rook, and we know this is winning end game. Or if it's black's turn to move, black cannot do anything to stop this pawn. So he cannot come here to stop the promotion, or he cannot come neither here or not here. So he cannot control this f8 square, the promotion square, and this is white is winning in any case. Okay, let's go to the next position. So in this position we have another imbalance. So white has a rook and two pawns against rook at the bishop. So bishop is, compared to two pawns. And according to our table, well, black should be better because bishop is stronger than two pawns. But well, here in this particular position, white is actually winning because white can now give up the exchange, so give the rook for bishop. And now after black takes, it looks like that black is now even better because he has rook against two pawns, and rook should be much stronger than two pawns according to our table. But still, black is losing here because these are two connected pawns which can get to the 6th rank, and once the pawn gets to 6th rank, the rook cannot stop one of the pawns from promoting. So the winning move here is king to g5, attacking the rook, and once rook moves away, you'll have connected pawns on the 6th rank, and rook cannot stop these pawns. So these pawns will advance, and one of these pawns will promote, and white will end up in the winning endgame. Okay, let's see the next example. So now in the next few examples, we'll talk about bishop versus knight. So in our table, we saw that bishop and knight are equally worth. Most grandmasters prefer bishops, but it's not an absolute rule. It depends very much on the position. So it depends whether position is cramped, whether it is blocked by the pawns. It depends a lot about pawn structure. So it depends that, if the bishop has open diagonals for his action or not, and so on. So it depends on several positional characteristics which piece which will be stronger. And usually in the amateur world and in the world of chess beginners, knights are overestimated because beginners are often afraid of knights because knight can jump to all kinds of squares, and then you need to take care of each of these position, and from each of these squares, knight, for example, if he comes here, he now attacks several set of squares. So it's a little bit difficult to calculate for beginners, and this is why beginners are often very intimidated by the knight, because he can jump around, and whenever he jumps, he can make threats in all 8 directions on the board. So it's a little bit scary. But on the other hand, if you are playing long games, if you have enough time on the clock, you shouldn't be afraid of the knight. Everything can be calculated. You just need to calmly consider all the squares which knight can jump to and all the threats he can do from the squares. And this can be done. So if you know how to do this, if you just keep calm, then you should not be afraid of the knight. Okay, let's now go to this particular position. So here black knight completely dominates this bishop. And why is this so? Because you can see that white's pawns are on the same color as the bishop, so this bishop doesn't have free diagonals for his activity, and also white pawns are all the light squares. This means that this bishop cannot attack these pawns. So and also this bishop is passive, it has defensive role, it has to defend these two pawns. So in the last lesson we talked about chess plan. So we can apply this thinking here. So ask yourself, what is black's plan here? So what does black want to do? And if you think about it, black wants to come with his king on c4, because then his king will penetrate the position, and he will easily, just take all the pawns. So this is black's plan, and now black will try to realize this plan. So the sequence of moves starts with knight to a5, check, kicking away the king. King wants to, stop opponent's king from coming to c4. So king goes to c3, and now king to a4. And now you can see that this king cannot move, because if the king moves, then this king will just penetrate. So white can not do anything better but just to play waiting moves with the bishop. And now black has enough time to remaneuver his knight, so knight to c6. White cannot do anything but just go to and fro. And so now knight to a7, he's just remaneuvering the knight. Bishop goes back, and now check. King to d3, and now black king goes to b3, so penetrating the position, being on the light squares, and getting ready to occupy c4. And now again, how should the game continue? I will not play all the moves from here, but now again white cannot do anything but just to play waiting moves with his bishop, and in the meantime black can just jump around with the knight and try to check the king, and once the king move, this king will penetrate to c4. So for example, black can try to deliver check here on b4, so some kind of maneuver like this will just win the game. Okay, let's see the next example. So here again we have bishop against knight, but now in this position bishop is much stronger, because you can see that this bishop is a long range piece, so although this bishop is far away, it can stop black pawn from promoting, and the black's knight cannot stop this pawn from promoting. So this is the problem. So here black will play something like knight to d3, but then just the pawn can be pushed immediately, or even maybe more correctly would be to play king to f5. Now stopping any hope of black's knight to go even near the white's pawn, and now the pawn will just promote, and this will be one game, because this bishop is taking care of this pawn. So in this position bishop is much stronger than the knight. Okay, let's see the next example. So this is from the black's perspective. Again, bishop against knight, but here bishop will be proved to be much stronger. But first of all, let's see what is the plan for black. So you can see that black can immediately take this pawn, but then if he takes the pawn, then he will run into this check, and white will win black's pawn as well. So black should calculate this a little bit and come up with the following plan. So the plan is to exchange these pawns, and then use the king to shut out the white's king. So black king can go either to, for example, c2 or b2, shutting away this white's king, and then using the bishop and the king, he can promote the pawn. So this is the plan, and this is how the game went. So king took the pawn, white played this check, and now king goes to b3, and white knight just takes the pawn. But now king goes to c2, so keeping the opposition, and now king cannot come forward. So knight to d6 is played here, hoping to be able maybe to jump here and stop the pawn from promoting. a5, knight to b5. Now knight is controlling this dark square, again hoping to stop the pawn from promoting. e4 is played, and now king to e1. This is just a waiting move, because he cannot move this knight. This knight has to cover this square. And now black has to include his bishop in the game, but there is a subtlety here. So bishop wants to go to c5, helping this pawn to promote. But black doesn't want to immediately play bishop to c5, because he wants to keep the opposition between the kings. So this is the concept of the opposition, which I now just mentioned, but we will talk about this in more details in the following lessons. So anyway, he doesn't play bishop to c5 immediately, but he first plays bishop to e3, and now after king moves, now he plays c5. So he goes in two moves here. So now, there is this opposition of the king, and this king will be shut out. So king to e1, he cannot move the knight, and now king can go forward and attack the knight. So king to b3, king to d2, king to c4, attacking the knight, and knight has to move away. So for example, knight to c7, a3, king to c2, bishop d4, now protecting the promotion square, and king can try to go to b1, just to stop the pawn from advancing, but then just king to b3, and now there is nothing which can stop the pawn from advancing. So we saw in this position also that bishop proved to be stronger because of its long range, and the knight is not so good in stopping the pawns. Okay, let's go to the next position. So in this position, maybe you can stop and think for yourself, what do you think, which piece is stronger? So if you have been following so far, you can see that this bishop is cramped by his own pawns. So all the pawns are on the light squares, and all the white pawns are on the dark squares. So bishop cannot attack white's pawns, and bishop's mobility is restricted by the black pawns. And this tells you that knight will be stronger here. So it's black's turn to move here, and whatever black does, white wins very easily. So for example, he can try to bring his bishop up to e6. But now there is a very typical sacrifice, which goes like knight takes c6 to, just to remove the pawn and to be able to promote. So after b takes c6 here, white can just promote. So this is very typical sacrifice, this kind. And if black does something else, if he plays, for example, king to g7 and moving to king somewhere, then king just penetrates to g5 and wins the pawn. And again, then this pawn will win the game. So remember, this sacrifice, we will talk about it more later. It's very thematic. Okay, but just from the, it takes 2 seconds to see that this bishop is bad, and that the knight will outperform the bishop given the pawn structure. And the last example for this lesson, also bishop against knight, and now again you can ask yourself which piece is better. So this looks not so bad for this bishop because all the pawns are on the light squares, but still, if you can see, this bishop is cannot come to the game. So yeah, this bishop looks like a good bishop, but actually it's not, because it's shut off from the game. So the bishop is here, and the bishop cannot attack any pawns. This pawn is protected by the king, and all the other pawns are mutually protected, and this knight can just jump around. So you can see, when there are many pawns on the board and the pawns are blocked, then usually the bishop is not so effective. So this game continued knight to d3. Bishop went to c3, trying to make some pressure, maybe come to the game, and now knight to f4 is a check. And after king moves, so let's say that king moves to e7, then you have again this kind of sacrifice, in which you sacrifice the piece in order to create a passed pawn. So knight to d5 here is the correct move with a check, and also check and attacking the bishop, so he has to take the knight, and after knight is took, c6, and one of these pawns will promote. There is no way king can stop these pawns, and also you can see that this bishop is blocked by his own pawn, and this bishop cannot stop these 2 pawns. So for example, if he tries to play something like king to d7, just c takes b7, and you can see that these double pawns create a wall. King cannot penetrate, and this is just, white is promoting and winning the game. Okay, this concludes our today's lesson. So I hope you get an idea what does the relative strength of pieces means, and how the strength of the piece depends on the position, and not so much on the table, which we all know, we all learned as beginners. Thank you very much for watching, and stay tuned for more lessons and more chess. Cheers.